Okay, we are going to read quite a few chapters today, starting with chapter 21, but they're kind of shorter, I think. But I do want to get this book finished too, so we only have 2 days. I spent the next few days watching Jackie flit around Colby like she'd lived there her whole life. She talked about high school football with the mailman and took cold fried chicken to Bertha's knitting club. She set up a vegetable stand at the end of the driveway and chatted with everybody who stopped to buy beans and squash, telling them about Rayleigh and her waitress job and her new driver's license. And at the thrift shop in Fairview, as I watched her laughing with the owner about a big ugly hat somebody brought in, I felt like I was seeing her for the first time. Maybe this was the new Jackie. How come I'd never noticed how much everybody loved her? Even Bertha's cats couldn't get enough of her, rubbing their heads against her legs and purring in her lap. Every one of the Odom boys was red-faced and tongue-tied around her, falling over each other to open the car door for her or bring her cold lemonade every time we went over there. I can't believe you know how to rebuild an engine, she said to Burl the first day we visited. And the next thing you know, she's out there in the driveway squinting down at a carburetor or something like it. Was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Every now and then, she flipped her hair over her shoulder, and I thought Burl was going to melt into a puddle right there in the gravel driveway. Mrs. Odom brought powdered sugar donuts out to the porch, and we sat around and listened to Jackie tell the Waffle House stories. And one time, she said, this old lady came in a limo driven by a chauffeur. She brushed powdered sugar off her lap. Can you imagine going to the Waffle House in a chauffeur-driven limo? Everybody agreed they couldn't imagine that. But she left me a $20 tip for a $4 waffles, so I'm not complaining, Jackie said. Howard and Dwight bugged their eyes out and said, wow. She told us how she and the other waitresses called it the Awful House, and those boys all hooted and hollered like that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Then she told everybody about Rayleigh, how big it is, and all the malls and tanning salons, and even an indoor miniature golf course. Y'all should come visit sometime, she said. I have my driver's license and Carol Lee has a car. They grinned and nodded and said how much they'd like to go to Rayleigh, and I felt jealousy poking at me so hard it made me squirm as I sat there on the porch steps. Late that afternoon, me and Howard took Jackie down to the creek with Wishbone, and she didn't waste a minute taking her shoes off and wading into the cold mountain water, her laughter echoing through the trees. She answered all Howard's nosy questions without a single eye roll and acted like she hung out with up-down boys every day of her life. What's it like when you visit your daddy in jail, he said. I liked to died when he asked that, but Jackie wasn't one bit bothered. Not as cool as it looks on TV, I can tell you that, she said. We just sit at a table and talk about school and stuff. He tells me how bad the food is there, and the first thing he's going to do when he gets out is eat about 14 hamburgers. I wanted to ask her if they ever talked about me, but I was scared the answer would be no, and I would look like a loser in front of Howard. I started to remind him that Scrappy was in a correctional facility, not a jail, but he and Jackie had already moved on to talking about the Bible detective game at Sunday school. I bet Charlie's terrible at that game, she said, giving me a poke. Reading the Bible was not exactly a popular activity at our house, right, Charlie? She poked me again. That night, Mrs. Odom invited me and Jackie to have supper with them. Burl and Lenny brought aluminum lawn chairs in from the yard for us and nearly knocked each other over trying to sit next to Jackie. She helped Mrs. Odom put plates of ham and bowls of coleslaw and baked beans on the table and didn't even blink an eye when everyone held hands and Dwight said the blessing and thanked the Lord for baked beans and new friends. I swear I felt invisible with everybody jibber-jabbered at the table. Jackie told them about being a Margarette in 10th grade and marching in the Memorial Day parade in the rain. Talk about a bad hair day, she said, and everyone laughed. Then she asked Mr. Odom about his job driving a lumber truck. When he described driving from Colby to Charlotte to Greenville and everywhere in between, she said, it must be so fun to go all those different places. Then she went on to tell him about her friend Loretta, who worked the night shift at the truck stop on the interstate, and boy, oh boy, did she have some stories to tell about some of those truckers. Mr. Odom blushed a little at that, and Mrs. Odom jumped in real quick to tell us about Howard being the Bible detective champion at church. No way, Jackie said. He didn't tell me that. And then it was Howard's turn to blush. Wishbone laid on the floor next to Cotton because he knew there would be food down there before long. Sure enough, he gobbled up a couple pieces of ham and some cornbread crumbs, and Jackie said, "Wishbone, stop that." But Mrs. Odom said, "That's okay. Shoot. Helps me keep the floor clean." Jackie laughed her sparkly laugh, and in that very minute I wanted to be her. I wanted her easy way of making people love her. I wanted her knack for seeing the good in things. I even wanted her shiny black hair with blue streaks. But no matter how bad I wanted it, I was still going to be just plain old me. Chapter 22. That Sunday, we piled into Gus's car and headed down the mountain to church. Jackie had French braided my hair like she used to back in Raleigh, and Bertha made a fuss over it. "I just love Charlie's hair like that," she said. "Jackie, you should get a job in a beauty parlor. You have real talent." Jackie thwacked her forehead and said she couldn't believe she'd never thought of that before. "I might look into that when I get home," she said. So then Bertha told us a story about her friend Denise, who flunked out of beauty school. Just flunked right out after 3 weeks and ended up marrying some rich guy. But not 2 months later, she ran off to Atlanta with that rich guy's brother. Jackie loved Bertha's stories and always laughed or said, "No way," or "I can't believe that," while me and Gus just sat in silence pretending to be interested. After church, Jackie snatched cookies off the food table in the fellowship hall and then went to hang out with the teenagers in the parking lot, like she'd known them her whole life. How had Jackie and I turned out so different? I was sure she never worried one little bit about whether or not anybody liked her. And then, of course, everybody did like her, so what was there to worry about? That afternoon, the Odoms came over to Gus and Bertha's for dinner. Bertha always made a big deal out of Sunday dinner, but with the Odoms coming, it was a regular feast. Jackie and I helped her set up some card tables out in the front yard. We pushed them together, then put a sheet over them for a tablecloth, and Jackie set out mason jars filled with wildflowers. "Looks like the Queen of England is coming for dinner," Gus said. Bertha bustled around the kitchen, and before long the house was filled with all kinds of good smells, and the countertops were covered with bowls of black-eyed peas and turnip greens, squash casseroles and sliced tomatoes, fried orca and succotash, biscuits and gravy, brownies and peach cobbler. Then she took a big roast chicken out of the oven and said, "There. Now, if I can keep the cats out of here, we're all set." Of course, Wishbone sat by the kitchen door with his nose twitching in the air and his tail wagging a mile a minute. "Not yet, boy," I told him. "Maybe later." Then we heard Burl's truck on the gravel driveway, and me and Wishbone ran out to greet the Odoms. All those red-headed boys spilled out of the back of the truck, and the front yard was usually so quiet, except for the birds on the fence post or the sputter of the sprinkler in the garden, turned into a flurry of commotion. Dwight and Lenny running and punching and climbing on the fence, Cotton chasing after the cats, Mrs. Odom hurrying inside to help Bertha with the food, Mr. Odom and Gus out in the lawn chairs talking about NASCAR race over in Charlotte last week, Howard and me tossing a tennis ball for Wishbone to catch. Then Jackie came outside looking like Miss America, and I thought Burl was going to faint right there in the red dirt. Everybody else had changed out of their church clothes except Jackie. When she came strutting across the yard in her white sundress and bare feet, I don't think I'd ever seen her look so pretty. I still had that French braid in my hair, so maybe I looked pretty too, even in my shorts and ratty t-shirt. I hoped so, but I knew I could never look as pretty as Jackie. Before long, Bertha told everybody to go inside and load up their plates, and those boys liked to busted the door down, racing to the kitchen. Then we sat at the card tables in the yard and held hands while Mr. Odom said the blessing. Gus and Bertha weren't the blessing type, but I guess they did it to be nice to their company. Mr. Odom sure had a lot of stuff to be thankful for, everything from this beautiful day to those turnip greens. Then he said, "And thank you for sending these two fine young ladies to shine their light on us here in Colby." I knew I was supposed to have my eyes closed, but I took a peek, and there was Jackie grinning and winking at me. As soon as we all said aloud, "Amen," everybody dove into their food like there was no tomorrow. Mrs. Odom and Bertha kept running back into the kitchen to bring out more tomatoes or succotash, while Jackie poured sweet tea and Gus shooed cats away. Wishbone sat by Cotton, hoping he'd drop a chicken leg. By the time Bertha brought out dessert, everybody was rubbing their stomachs and saying how they couldn't possibly eat another bite, except, well, maybe just a little bit of that peach cobbler. Cotton leaned across the table to grab a brownie and said, "Hey, look, the wishbone." Sure enough, right there on that greasy platter was the chicken wishbone. Of course, my dog, Wishbone, heard his name and ran to Cotton, probably thinking he was about to get something good to eat. "Who wants to pull the wishbone with me?" Cotton said. Dwight jumped up. "Me," he said. "No," I hollered, pushing Dwight out of the way. "It has to be me." Cotton held the bone behind his back when Dwight tried to grab it. "I called it first, Charlie," Dwight said. I stamped my foot. "No, it's mine." I could feel the anger flooding over me, and it was all I could do to keep myself from shoving Dwight. Then Howard hurried over and whispered "pineapple" in my ear, just as I was stamping my foot again. Jackie shook my shoulder and snapped, "Good grief, Charlie, quit making such a fuss over a silly old bone." But Howard piped up and said, "Come on, Dwight, let Charlie pull the wishbone." Uh-oh. Was Howard going to tell everybody about me making a wish every day? I hadn't told him not to tell anybody, and now I bet he was, and everybody was going to think I was crazy. But he didn't. He told Dwight he'd give him some of his Bible bucks if he'd let me pull the wishbone with Cotton. "How many?" Dwight asked. "3. Make it 5. Okay." So Dwight ran off to grab another brownie, and Cotton held the wishbone out to me. We each took a side and closed our eyes. I made my wish, and then I pulled. Snap! That bone broke in two, and guess what? I got the big side, the side that's supposed to make your wish come true. "Dang it," Cotton said, tossing his piece of the bone onto the table. Before I had a chance to thank Howard for helping me like that, Mr. Odom announced that it was time for them to go, and they piled back into Burl's truck. I knew I should have joined Jackie and helped Bertha clean up in the kitchen, but instead, I sat out in the yard with my arm around Wishbone and watched the truck bounce up the gravel driveway, loaded with all those good-hearted Odoms. When they turned onto the road, I hollered, "Thank you." I figured Howard probably wouldn't hear me, but then I saw him give me a thumbs up before the truck disappeared from sight. Chapter 23. On Jackie's last day in Colby, she and Bertha sat together at the sewing machine in my room and talked about boys and clothes and movie stars while they worked on a zipper. I took Wishbone out in the yard and pulled weeds from between the marigolds beside the garden shed while he slept in the sun. I hated thinking about Jackie getting on that bus to Raleigh, going back to her happy life, painting her fingernails with Carol Lee, dating Scooter, the paintball champion, maybe even going to beauty school. Each yank of a weed was like a jab in my heart as I thought about her leaving me behind. By the time Jackie and Bertha finished that zipper, there wasn't a single weed left in the yard, and my heart ached so bad I wanted to cry. Later that day, me and Jackie and Wishbone went down to the Odoms so Jackie could say goodbye. The boys sat on the porch steps, looking like they were going to a funeral. "Y'all better come visit me in Raleigh," Jackie said. She threw her arms out wide. "Everybody. We'll have us the best time ever." They nodded solemnly, and Cotton swiped at tears. "If I'm still working at that old Waffle House, y'all come by and I'll throw in a couple of chocolate chip waffles for free." Cotton perked up. "Chocolate chip waffles?" Jackie nodded. "Yup, and I'll make sure they put extra chips in yours, okay?" He grinned. "I bet Charlie's gonna miss you," Howard said. Jackie put her arm around my shoulder. "Well, I'm gonna miss her too, but she can come visit." "Visit?" I said. "I'll be going back there to live." I rubbed my hand down Wishbone's back. "You know, when Mama gets her feet on the ground," I added. Jackie looked down at her lap. Wishbone's tail swished back and forth in the dry red dirt. "Well then," Jackie said, "I reckon it's time for me to get my hugs in." She held her arms out. Each of those boys gave her a quick, awkward hug. Then Mrs. Odom ran out of the house and said, "It was just a joy and a blessing having you here in Colby, Jackie." Then she and Jackie hugged, and we headed back home. That night, Bertha made a special supper of meatloaf and lima beans, fried green tomatoes, and sweet potato pie. Wishbone laid beside my chair and waited for somebody to toss him a piece of meatloaf every now and then. I have to admit that we'd spoiled him rotten and turned him into a world-class beggar. After we sat out on the porch for a while, me and Jackie went back to my room. I brushed Wishbone while Jackie packed, stuffing her shorts and things into her duffel bag and telling me again how lucky I was to have such a nice place to live. I watched her gather her nail polish and toss it into the duffel bag, and I started to feel more pitiful by the minute. "What's going to happen to me?" I wanted to ask her, but I didn't. After we turned the lights out, I stared up at the ceiling, watching the shadows of the dogwood tree dance in the moonlight. Then I took a deep breath and said, "Can I go back to Rayleigh with you?" The silence that followed nearly swallowed me up. I could feel my heartbeat in my chest and Wishbone's warm breath against my cheek. Then Jackie got out of bed and sat beside my sleeping bag. "Nothing's going to change, Charlie," she said. "I used to think it would, but now I don't. Scrappy is going to keep being Scrappy, and Mama is going to keep being Mama. And you and I are on our own. No magic wand is going to fix things." I didn't want to believe that, so I pushed those words away so I wouldn't have to think about them. Then I said, "Did you know Mama left us when we were little, just ran off with a garbage bag full of clothes to start a new life?" Jackie heaved a big sigh. "Yes, I did know that." "How'd you know?" "When you're 7 years old and your mama waltzes out the door without so much as a goodbye, well, that's something you don't forget." "How come you never told me?" I said. She put her hand on my back and rubbed it in little circles. "'Cause I didn't want you to hate Mama," she said. "Do you hate Mama?" "Nah," she pushed her hair behind my ear. "I don't like her very much, but I don't hate her." "But why can't I live with you?" I asked so quiet it was almost a whisper. Jackie hugged her knees. "Charlie, I can't live with Carol Lee forever. I'm saving my money, and me and Waylene Jarvis are getting an apartment together. I can't take care of you like Gus and Bertha can," she said. "Shoot, I can barely take care of myself." We sat in silence for a minute. Then Jackie said, "You got a good life here, Charlie. You got Gus and Bertha loving you and treating you like a princess. You got all those Odoms thanking the good Lord for you. Then there's Howard, the nicest friend you could ever want. You got these beautiful mountains and a garden and a porch to sit on that's like sitting on the side of heaven." Wishbone kicked his legs and let out a little woof like he was having a doggy dream. Jackie rubbed his stomach. "And a dog that loves you like nobody's business." I looked at Wishbone and thought about Bertha saying how dogs love you no matter what, and my heart nearly burst. "Don't hate me, Charlie," Jackie said. "Hate her?" "I loved everything about her. I loved the old Jackie and the new Jackie. Why couldn't I tell her that? I guess I hadn't had much practice saying I love you, so I just sat there in the darkness with Wishbone twitching in his sleep beside me and said, "I do like those blue streaks in your hair." Chapter 24. The week after Jackie left, I started vacation Bible school at Rocky Creek Baptist Church. I told Bertha I didn't want to go, but she kept telling me how much I was going to love it. "I went to vacation Bible school every summer when I was a girl," she said. "I loved everything about it, the games, the crafts, the songs." She went on to tell me about making a bird feeder by putting peanut butter on a pine cone and rolling it in birdseed. "And lanyards? I must have made about 100 lanyards." She laughed and shook her head. "And macrame keychains. I loved those. And," she said, "Howard and all the kids from Sunday school will be there." So I finally said okay, but then the day before I was supposed to go, Bertha came home with a lunchbox covered with ponies and rainbows. "I can't believe I let you take your lunch to school in an ugly old paper bag," she said. "I can't take that," I said. Bertha's smile faded. "Oh," she said, "okay." I could tell I'd hurt her feelings, but there was no way I could take that lunchbox. Bertha snatched it off the kitchen counter and stuck it way up on the top shelf of the cupboard. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said. "That thing is just plumb silly." So she put my lunch in a brown paper bag, and off I went to vacation Bible school. We sat in a circle in the shade and listened to Miss Rhonda tell us how much fun we were going to have. Even though we knew each other from Sunday school, she said, "First, I'd like for each of y'all to tell us your name and 3 fun facts about yourself." Right away, I thought about my first day of school in Colby in that Getting to Know You paper. But this time, when it was my turn, instead of saying I liked soccer, ballet, and fishing, I said, "I have a dog named Wishbone. My sister works at the Waffle House. My Aunt Bertha has 7 cats." We spent the morning making papier-mâché bowls and singing a song about Moses in the bulrushes. When it was time for lunch, I got my brown paper bag and sat next to Audrey Mitchell. I'd made up my mind I was going to be more like Jackie from now on, cool and confident, making friends left and right. But before I could think of something to say to Audrey, Howard plopped down next to me. "Earl wrote Jackie a letter," he said. "What for?" He shrugged. Lenny snatched it right out of his hand and they got in a fight. Burl chased him around the house, cussing, and broke a lamp. He lifted the corner of his sandwich and examined the bologna and mustard inside. Did Burl get the letter back? I asked. Howard flattened a sandwich between the palms of his hands. Yeah, he said, but it got ripped and now they're both grounded because of the cussing in the lamp. He pushed at his damp red hair. His arms were sunburned, bright pink and dotted with freckles. He went on to tell me about Dwight breaking his pinky finger at baseball camp. While Howard talked, I watched Audrey Mitchell out of the corner of my eye. She sat cross-legged with a paper napkin on her lap. She had butterfly barrettes in her hair, and her sneakers didn't have one speck of dirt on them. Her lunchbox was plain, no ponies or rainbows on it. She opened it and peered inside. Then she took out a plastic bag full of grapes, something wrapped in foil, and a folded-up piece of paper. I scooted a little closer to her and pretended I was listening to Howard while she opened the paper. It was a note with big, swirly handwriting. When she put it down on the grass next to her grapes, I squinted at it, trying to read it. And Cotton had 2 ticks on him, Howard was saying, so Mama made him strip down naked right there in the yard. A couple of kids giggled, and I shot Howard a look. Nobody wanted to hear the word naked while they ate their lunch, but Howard went right on talking like he didn't even notice. Just then, some girl I didn't know said, "Sit here, Audrey," and patted the ground next to her. So Audrey scooped up her grapes and stuff and moved away from me and Howard, leaving that piece of paper behind. Right away, I slapped my foot down on top of it. While Audrey and that girl chatted away about swimming lessons and soccer camp, I snatched up the paper and stuffed it in my pocket. "What was that?" Howard asked. "What was what?" "That paper." "What paper?" "That paper in your pocket." "Nothing." Howard wiped at a dab of mustard on his shorts. "Okay," he said. All afternoon, while we read Bible stories out loud and watched Miss Rhonda's teenage son do magic tricks, I thought about that note in my pocket. Every once in a while, I reached in and wrapped my fingers around it. Finally, I got my chance. Howard was helping Miss Rhonda take the Bible storybooks back inside the church, and Audrey was busy being friends with everybody but me. So I took the paper out of my pocket and read it. "Have fun at Vacation Bible School. I will be missing you. I love you very much. Mama." Quickly, I folded it and jammed it back into my pocket. I looked over at Audrey, linking arms with some girl and whispering. I closed my eyes, and in my mind, I became Audrey, a girl with perfect sneakers and a friend to whisper secrets to, and a mama who wrote, "I love you very much," on a note for me. But then I opened my eyes, and I was me again. That night, we had corn on the cob for supper. I counted the rows of corn on my cob, and I couldn't believe it. Exactly 14. That was on the list of things you can wish on. I counted one more time to make sure, and then I closed my eyes and made my wish. "Oh, I almost forgot," Bertha said, jumping up from the table. She took something off the counter and handed it to me. A lunchbox. A plain lunchbox with no ponies or rainbows. She lifted her eyebrows and said, "What do you think? Better?" A wave of guilt swept over me and caught me by surprise. I felt bad that Bertha had spent money to buy another lunchbox for me. I should have just taken the one with rainbows and ponies and been thankful for it. I bet Jackie would have, but I hadn't, and now here was Bertha being so nice to me. "Yes, ma'am," I said, "thank you." Then we went out on the porch and tossed a tennis ball to Wishbone till he got tired and went to sleep at my feet. As I watched the sun sink slowly behind the mountains, I cupped my hand around that note in my pocket. I thought about Audrey's mother putting those grapes in that little bag and writing that note. I wondered what Audrey's family was like, the one she had written on her flower for the garden blessings at church. I knew for sure her daddy wasn't wasn't away somewhere getting corrected, and I bet she had a sister who played cards with her on rainy days and whispered secrets under the covers at night. And I was certain her mama had her feet on the ground. When it got dark and the mosquitoes came out, me and Wishbone went back to my room. I fished around in my backpack until I found a piece of paper and a pen. I tore the paper in half and sat on the floor and wrote, "I love you very much, Mama." Then I folded the paper up and tucked it under my pillow before turning out the light and kissing Wishbone on the top of his head. All right, and chapter 25 is the last one we're going to read today. The next day at Bible school, we made up bottle cap magnets with 10 commandments on them. Then we played some game where we had to wrap ourselves in strips of crepe paper like Joseph's coat of many colors and race around an obstacle course. I guess Miss Rhonda didn't remember about Howard and his up-down walk when she thought up that game. He came in last and ripped his coat of many colors, but he didn't seem to care. At lunch, we sat in the shade and took out our lunch boxes. Howard was helping Miss Rhonda gather up all the crepe paper strips, so I plopped myself down next to Audrey. Hey, I said. Hey, Audrey said, and then she scooted closer to a girl named Lainey, who had scabs all over her legs. I couldn't believe she'd rather sit closer to a scabby-legged girl than me, but I guess she did. I told her I was sorry about the kicking and shoving, hadn't I? I didn't know what else I could do to make friends with her. I opened my new lunchbox and took out the things that Bertha had packed for me. A bagel with peanut butter, strawberries in a margarine tub, some cookies she made that were kind of burnt on the bottom. Then I took out the note that I had written the night before, the one that said, "I love you very much, Mama." I opened it and held it in front of me. Then I cleared my throat so maybe Audrey would look my way and see the paper, but she was busy stirring her yogurt. So I tossed the paper on the grass almost in front of her. "You dropped your trash," she said. "What?" "That's your trash," she pointed to the paper. "You mean that note?" She shrugged. "Whatever." "It's from my mama," I said, rolling my eyes. "She's all the time doing that." I nudged the paper a little closer to her so maybe she would read it. "I thought you lived with your aunt and uncle," she said. "Well, not all the time. I mean, most of the time, but my mama comes to visit a lot, and she's always writing these notes." I knew my face was beet red, so I kept my eyes on the ground. Audrey made a face. "You're not supposed to lie at vacation Bible school." She said the word Bible real loud and mean-sounding. Before I knew it, I was standing over her with my fists balled up and my heart beating like crazy. I felt red-hot anger settle over me like a blanket. I wanted to stomp on her perfect sneakers. I wanted to yank those butterfly barrettes out of her hair. But then Howard came up behind me saying, "Pineapple, pineapple, pineapple." Audrey grabbed her yogurt and lunchbox and stood up. "Y'all are crazy," she said, and stormed off toward the church. "What the heck, Charlie?" Howard said. "You're gonna smack somebody at church?" I dropped back down to the grass and began throwing my bagel and stuff in my lunchbox. Howard sat beside me. "Why are you so mad?" "She said I lied." "Did you?" "No." I snatched that stupid note up and tossed it in the lunchbox. He looked at me over the top of his glasses the same way old grown-up would. Sorry. He looked at me over the top of his glasses the way some old grown-up would. Then, no reason to get mad. He peered into my lunchbox. "Are you going to eat that bagel?" It took me a while to simmer down, but I finally did. Still, I sure wasn't in the mood to memorize Bible verses. When it was almost time to go home, Miss Rhonda told us to go inside and help set up chairs for Sunday school. As Howard made his way toward the church, T.J. Rainey followed behind him, walking in an up-down way like Howard. He looked around to make sure everybody was watching, a big old grin on his face like he was the funniest person in the universe. Suddenly, Howard turned around, but T.J. didn't even stop. He kept walking toward Howard, up, down, and then I couldn't believe my eyes. Howard just turned back around and went on his way like nothing had even happened. Well, I can tell you for sure that there weren't enough pineapples in the world to keep me from running straight at TJ, full steam ahead. I kept my arms stiff in front of me, and bam! I shoved him so hard his head snapped back and he crashed face first into the dirt. I confess, I was more than a little surprised when he got right up and shoved me back, knocking me to the ground. I scrambled to my feet and was ready to haul off and bust him one when Miss Rhonda stepped between me and TJ with her fists jammed into her waist and a look of pure horror on her face. "Stop it right now," she hollered. "This is not Bible school behavior." So that's how I ended up sitting on a church pew with T.J. Rainey, listening to Miss Rhonda talk about forgiveness and kindness and goodness and grace and all that stuff. It seemed to me like Audrey Mitchell ought to be sitting here in her perfect sneakers while Miss Rhonda quoted some stuff about doing unto others. Every once in a while, TJ shot me a glare and I shot one right back. When Bertha came to pick me up, Miss Rhonda had to go and tell her what happened. Bertha nodded and said, "Oh dear," and "Yes, ma'am," and "I will," and then we rode home in silence. Mama would have been hollering at me, asking me what in the world was wrong with me, and I can't go one darn day without causing trouble. But not Bertha. She reached over and patted my knee and said, "You're a good friend to Howard, Charlie." When we got home, me and Wishbone went out front and sat in the shade of the dogwood tree. The air was still and hot, the red dirt yard dry and dusty. Bertha's nasturtiums, I don't know, by the front door spilled over the sides of the flower pots and drooped onto the ground. The sprinklers sputtered in circles out in the garden, leaving glistening drops of water dripping off the okra and settling into little pools inside the yellow flowers of the cucumber plants. When I'd first gotten to Colby, most of that garden had been just rows of tiny green plants poking out of the ground. But now plump red tomatoes grew fatter every day, yellow flowers turned into bright green zucchini, and pole beans hung in clusters from vines and snaked up twine to form leafy teepees. A blue jay landed in the yard near us, and Wishbone's ears perked up. He cocked his head and watched the bird hop in and out of the marigolds along the fence. I put my arm around him and rubbed his long, velvety ears between my fingers. He licked my face, his tail swishing back and forth on the dusty ground. "I swear that dog loves you to pieces," Bertha kept telling me. And I do believe it was true. He'd gotten to where he wouldn't let me out of his sight, following me around from room to room, laying by my chair at the kitchen table, sleeping with his head on my feet out on the porch. I didn't even need to keep him on a leash out in the yard anymore. He stayed right by my side everywhere I went. He might trot over to sniff a shrub or snap at the bumblebees on the clover by the porch, but he always glanced back to make sure I was still there. And every time he did that, I loved him more. After a while, Bertha came outside and brought us saltine crackers with peanut butter. She let Wishbone eat one right off her hand and didn't even care when he slobbered on her. Then out of the clear blue, she said, "Charlie, I really admire you for sticking up for Howard like you did today." Admired me? Well, that was a first. I was pretty sure nobody on earth had ever admired me before. "You do?" I said. She nodded. "I do." And so we ate out there in the shade of the dogwood while the sun beat down on the dirt yard. Bertha told me a story about when she and Mama were little girls and went to a lake one summer. Carla had never been in water deeper than a bathtub in her life, Bertha said. So when she fell off the dock into the murky water, everybody went crazy. But I swear she popped right up like a cork without so much as a sputter. Then she just floated on her back, staring up at the sky while everybody ran up and down the dock, hollering and carrying on, and my Uncle Jared jumped in after her and ruined his brand new wristwatch. Bertha chuckled and swatted at the gnats that were hovering over Wishbone as he slept. The girl was walking wonder sometimes, she said. Of course, I couldn't help but ask myself how a woman who can't get out of bed and get to her feet on the ground could be a walking wonder. But I was still basking in the glow of being admired, so, for once, I kept quiet and didn't mess things up. And one time, Bertha went on, she snipped all the buttons off my blouses. She cut the air with her fingers like scissors. Snip, snip, snip. Right off onto the floor. Why'd she do that? "Beats the heck out of me," she said. She did the craziest things you ever saw. She reached over suddenly and grabbed my knee. Well, not crazy, but just, kind of, odd. She let go of my knee and went back to swatting gnats away from Wishbone. About the only thing I remember our poor mama ever saying was, "Carla, stop that." I nodded. I had a perfect picture in my mind of little Carla snipping those buttons. Snip, snip, snip. Before long, Gus's car came bouncing and squeaking up the gravel driveway. "Hey, Butterbean," he called out the window. Then he got out, kissed Bertha on the cheek, patted Wishbone on the head, and told me I was a ray of sunshine at the end of a long, sorry day. That night in bed, I laid on top of the cool sheets with Wishbone's soft, warm body next to me. I thought about my broken family back in Rayleigh and wondered if they were thinking about me, a ray of sunshine at the end of a long, sorry day. All right, and we will finish the book tomorrow.